Hey Rebels Local Alliance Church, glad you could join us online. It is super smoky out there still, so keep praying for rain. We could do with that. We can barely see the mountains or anything else. It is pretty awful, but we trust in Jesus, and so even though things round about us seem to be falling apart between COVID and wildfires, we're still plowing on. All right, today we are continuing on with our Encounters with Jesus sermon series. It's our summer sermon series. We're looking at different encounters that people had with Jesus as written in the Gospel of John. Each week is a standalone sermon, but by the end of the 10 weeks, you will have a very good picture, a mosaic, if you will, of who Jesus is and what Jesus taught. And we will also have a clearer picture of the relationship between humans and sin and salvation and Jesus. This week we're looking at one of my very favorite passages in the Bible. Open with me, please, to John chapter 11. John chapter 11. I'll give you a second just to find it on your device, boop, 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 or in your Bible. John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." All right, so that's the intro to the situation. We have Mary, Martha, Lazarus. They are all siblings. They live together in a house in Bethany, which is just a couple of kilometers away from Jerusalem down south. It seems to be that it was Mary's house. She's the older sibling. And Jesus loved this family. He seems to have stayed there quite a few times, interacted with that family a bunch of times. Whenever he was doing ministry in Jerusalem, I think that's most likely where he stayed. And so it's a family that he knows well, that he loves, that loves him. A place where he and the disciples can crash when they're doing ministry stuff. Good situation. Apart from now, Lazarus is sick. So the sisters send word to Jesus, who is up north in Galilee, and said, "Can you come down, pray for Lazarus? He is really sick." And so that's the situation. And Jesus does a very odd thing when he gets this request. He waits for a few days before heading off to go to his sick friend, and he says something kind of cryptic, that this sickness won't end in death, and that the situation will be used for God's glory and to reveal the glory of who Jesus is as God the Son. And so we've got this situation going on where Jesus is deliberately holding off for a couple of days and then heads down. Now we already know from one of the previous sermons in this series, if you've been tracking along, that Jesus can just speak the word and a person is healed. We saw that with the king's official's son up in Cana in Galilee, that Jesus just spoke the word, and 25 kilometers away, the kid was healed. So why the delay this time? I mean, he doesn't even have to physically come down there. He can just say the word and Lazarus is healed. But instead, he waits 2 days and starts heading down. Especially because Lazarus is his friend that he loved. Why not just heal him, or at least set off straight away? And because, as usual, Jesus has another purpose in mind behind this miracle that's about to occur. And that purpose is the revelation of who he really is and the furtherance of God's kingdom and God's glory. So he waits for reasons only known to himself at this point, hasn't shared that with anyone else, and then he sets off. If we skip forward to verse 17. On his arrival, this is down at Bethany now, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. Now, this is an awesome conversation. There are lots of things going on here that we need to take and pause and think through and just wrestle around with. Martha hears that Jesus is on his way. She goes out to meet him, and the first words out of her mouth is an accusation. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But again, Jesus has something far bigger in mind, something that Martha at this point cannot possibly comprehend. Jesus replies, your brother will rise again. Martha responds in faith, yes, at the final judgment day, the resurrection of the dead, I believe that. And you see, Martha was known through the rest of the Gospels for sitting and taking in all of Jesus' teaching. She was known for her faith, for how much she trusted Jesus. So her reply is theologically sound one. My brother will rise at the final resurrection. She believes that. But Jesus had something else in mind. Just listen and pause and sit in this statement by Jesus. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? You see, we have seen throughout this sermon series what is wrong with the world. What is broken in the world. Pride. Social shunning, sickness, hunger, thirst, spiritual brokenness, sin. And we have seen each time Jesus show that he is the answer to all of those things. But here Jesus reveals something about himself that Martha has missed. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Now look at the I am again. It's one of the 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. In Hebrew, that is Yahweh. That's God's name, Yahweh. That's the name God revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush before Moses went to challenge Pharaoh to set my people free. He says, I am the Yahweh, the God. I am God. I am God, the resurrection and the life. He doesn't say here that he's teaching about resurrection, or that he can pray to God for resurrection, but that he is the resurrection and the life. Jesus is fully God. That's what he's telling Martha. I am Yahweh, the resurrection and the life. And that as God, he is the creator and the sustainer of life itself. He couldn't be more clearer about who he is in this response to Martha. Jesus, the source of life. Martha wasn't talking to a wise teacher or a holy priest or a deep philosopher or even a powerful miracle worker. She was talking to God, to the Creator. I am Yahweh. I am the resurrection and the life. It continues in John, verse 28. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now when Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Okay, so Mary comes out now, the older sister, the more responsible one, the hard worker. And she says the same thing to Jesus as Martha had and said, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." They still have a limited understanding of who Jesus is, even though they're good friends and they're well on the track to grasping the full reality. They think that Jesus had to physically be there in order to work a miracle. If only they had really grasped who it was who was standing in front of them. Now, Jesus, being God, already knows what he is going to do. Now, you would think in this situation, being God, that he would be all smiles and high fives. He would be like, "Hey, listen, Mary, I got this. I'm God. This is no big deal. Just chill. I got it covered." Instead, Jesus here responds in an incredibly surprising way. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who'd come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled, it says in the English. Now, there is no translation in English, in any English Bible, that captures the full meaning of the original Greek here. Deeply moved is the attempt of the translators to capture this word in Greek as any brim esato. Any brim esato is the Greek word. And it means so much. It means more like he inwardly roared with pain and anger. Deeply moved is scratching the surface of this word, any brimisado. Have you ever inwardly roared with pain or with anger? Just, when something is too much to bear, too heavy to deal with, too much to even hear about. In other Greek texts, not Bible texts, but other Greek texts of the time, this word was used to describe the snorting of a war horse before it goes into battle. It kind of encapsulates pain, despair, anger, indignation, frustration at an epic level. It's an internal roar. But not only was Jesus any brimissato, not only did he have this deeply, moved, the verse also said he was tarasso in Greek, which is troubled, agitated, stirred, shaken, maybe even physically shaken, emotionally shaken. Jesus felt the full force of the grief of Mary and Martha. He roared at the pain that death causes. He was shaken. He was angry at the death of his friend. This is a really odd reaction for someone who is God. Why be moved? Why be in pain? All he had to do was speak the word and everything has changed. No big deal, right? No, wrong. Because in addition to being fully God and to being the resurrection and the life, one person of the Trinity, in addition to that, Jesus was also fully human. We've read already in John, he got thirsty, he got tired, he got hungry, he was moved with compassion, he was tempted by the devil, and he roared with grief. And then maybe the most incredible, most shocking, most surprising verse in the Bible, and also happens to be the shortest verse in the Bible. 2 words. Jesus wept. God, the creator of everything, the sustainer of everything, he wept. He had entered into his own creation. He took on himself human flesh and blood. He felt all the things that we feel. He'd gone through all the things we go through, and he wept. It's a mystery, but the Bible is really clear about this. Jesus was both fully God and fully human. He was the God-man. Now, the early church, after Jesus had died and was resurrected and went to heaven, and after even the apostles and disciples had died, so the early church after that had a difficult time reconciling these two things, these two truths about Jesus, that he was fully God and also fully man. Different groups sprung up in the first couple of hundred years of church history and claimed or emphasized different aspects of Jesus wrongly. Docetism was a movement early on in church history. That comes from the Greek word for to seem or to appear. And they taught that Jesus was only a spirit being that seemed to be a man. So he was fully God, but he wasn't human at all. This led on to another group that you may have heard of called the Gnostics, who taught that spirit was good and flesh was bad, and that they could not accept that God the Son took on human flesh. So they wrote a couple of their own gospel accounts to back up their view that Jesus, like Docetism, they believed that Jesus was spirit but not flesh. And so the Gospels that they wrote to back up their view were the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Judas, and both of those Gospels fully rejected by the early church. Then you had the Bonyism, another group that said that Jesus was only a man on whom the presence and the power of God worked mightily. So they didn't believe that he was God at all. He was just a man that God's power was involved with. And then after that, you had Arianism that taught that Jesus was himself a created being, a whole new hybrid, special class, separate class of being, created by God, but he wasn't God himself. Their famous saying was that there was a time when the Son was not, when Jesus didn't exist. And thus, as the Son of God, he was a different substance to God the Father. That Jesus, as I said, was some kind of different type of being altogether. And eventually the church got together in sort of big councils to wrestle through these difficult questions of what does the scripture say and what did the apostles and the disciples teach about who was Jesus. And they got together and they came to a consensus at the Council of Nicaea in 325. This is all the different little church groups from all around the Mediterranean. And they confirmed the full deity, that Jesus was fully God, and also the full humanity of Jesus. Now, we still see some of these heresies, these wrong thinkings, wrong teachings, kicking around today. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, believe that Jesus was a created being of a special nature, exactly like the Arians did, they believed. The Mormons also believe that Jesus is a created being, but they believe that he was a spirit brother to Satan, and that both Jesus and Satan presented plans of salvation to God, and God preferred Jesus' plan over Satan, so he let Jesus come down and work out his plan of salvation, whereas he kicked Satan out of heaven. So that's the Mormons' view. And then you've got subtle errors, like the belief of some Christian churches that believe that Jesus was fully God and fully human, but they believe that when he was born as a human, he left all of his godhood behind to just become a human while he was on earth. Now, they say he was only a human, but one that was empowered by the Holy Spirit. But it's not what Jesus taught. He taught, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the bread that has come down from heaven. Fully God, and at the same time, fully human. So all these viewpoints in the early church, and still ones that continue today, are wrong and unbiblical. Like I said, I am Yahweh, the resurrection and the life, and also he wept. Fully God, fully human. And this God-man came down to do two things. He came down to represent humanity. He represented God to humanity, to show humans what God was like. That was one of the things he came down to show humans who God was, to show us what it was like to interact with God. I mean, basically, Jesus was God with skin on. And at the same time, he also came to represent humanity back to the Father. He came to pay the price for all of humanity's sins, to be our great high priest, to be the mediator, the go-between between us and God the Father. So he had to be fully God and fully human to do those things. Let's keep reading in John. Verse 35, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved them." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, Greek, enebrum esato, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been in there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me." And when he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Wow. So Christianity is the only religion in the world where God enters into creation and takes on all the frailties, emotions, and temptations of humans. It's the only faith in the world that teaches that God knows, really knows, what we're going through. It's the only spiritual path where God weeps just as we weep. Now, the book of Hebrews, later on in the New Testament, is all about this interaction of God and humans in the person of Jesus. And it puts it this way. I'm going to read a few verses from Hebrews. I'm going to start with chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. Hebrews 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. "In the past, God spoke to our ancestors," that's the Jews, "through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir over all things, through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he'd provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven." Okay, let's keep reading in chapter 2, verses 14 to 18. Hebrews 2, verses 14 to 18. "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason, he had to be made fully like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted." Wow, so for this reason, that you might break the power of sin, for this reason he had to be made exactly like humans, fully human in every way, it says in Hebrews 2:17. Hebrews 4 continues, verse 14 to 16. "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he didn't sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. So just like reading those passages in John and following that up with those in Hebrews, it is very clear that Jesus is not a spirit in the appearance of a man. Neither is he just a man with special powers, but that Jesus Christ is the God-man. He is the resurrection and the life, the exact representation of God's being, but also a high priest who is able to empathize with our weaknesses, who wept over the death of his friend. Therefore, let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence, because Jesus is fully God and fully man. And that is why Jesus waited until Lazarus was dead before he came. Mary and Martha thought they needed some more of Jesus' power. They thought they needed another miracle of healing, that was their biggest need. But what they really needed was to see Jesus for who he really is, the resurrection and the life. The solution for all that is wrong with the world is not a political program, or a spiritual practice, or a cultural revolution, or an environmental plan. All those things are good. We need better politics. We need better spiritual practices. We need things in culture that are broken to be overthrown and removed. We need wildfires. We need a far better environmental plan. Those things are all true. But that's not the answer to what is wrong at the essence in the world. What the solution for all that is wrong in the world isn't a plan or a practice or a program. It's a person. The solution for all that is wrong in the world is Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Amen. Peace be with you. Have a great week.